the other part of that story is when I returned from World War II, we were being ushered and discharged. A recruiting sergeant there said, well, all you young guys, you're late coming home. All the older guys have all the jobs. You're not going to get any work, so you better sign up for the reserves. Mistake.
Yeah, that recruiter was pretty good at sales too.
Oh yeah, he knew his job. Besides, he said we only have a war every 20 years. He was wrong again. But that's how we got in the reserves, and how we got called up to go to Korea right away.
A true national treasure. Darrel Eichner discusses his fascinating roads traveled during his 94 years here on Earth. Born in the late 1920s, Ike lived through some of the most challenging times in our nation's history. His journey included military service in the European theater at the end of World War II, and about 18 months after returning home, a call up to serve again in the Korean War. In this episode, Ike discusses his upbringing, his military service, his successes in the business world, and his love for living in the Westbrook area.
Welcome, Ike, and thanks so much for finding time between pinochle games for this conversation. I'm super excited for our discussion. We have so much to learn from a guy like you. But first, I just want to express my heartfelt thanks and appreciation for the many ways in which you have served our nation so admirably, and how you continue to serve your community and fellow veterans in such a committed way. So thanks for that so much, Ike. First question for you. In looking at your history a little bit, you are a veteran of two extensive cruises, one going east, one going west. You took a boat cruise across the Atlantic back in the 40s, and then you took a nice trip across the Pacific less than, 6-7 years later in the early 50s across the Pacific. So what's it like to be a veteran of two cruise ships like that?
Well, the first trip, of course, was over to Europe. World War II had come to shooting war was ended, but we were being sent over as replacements. And also we had a little guard duty to do. But traveling on a cruise ship across the Atlantic in April is a cruise you want to forget. The ships gets pretty rough. In fact, when you stand up, when they eat on a cruise ship, you stand up at a galvanized table, a long table, and you have a tray. And of course, at that point, it was gotten so rough, even the crew was getting sick. But occasionally, your tray, if you didn't hang on, it would slide away, and somebody else's would come by. And by that time, you were done eating. But we got over there. We got to Le Havre, France, and we were unloaded again, and we went to one of the replacement depots. They called it, we went to Camp Camel. Every year, the replacement depot was named after a cigarette pack company of some kind. And then we got another kind of a cruise, which was really unusual. And that is they loaded us on some made up 40 and 8s. They are left over from World War I. And the 40 and 8 means it was built for 40 humans or 8 horses. In other words, it's just a boxcar that they put some kind of wooden bunks in, and either that or you stood up on them, one of the two. But we traveled over to different places. I was eventually shipped down to Enns, Austria, and that was that was the borderline between Russia and the United States at that time, where we did guard duty there because we were watching. At that time, of course, Mr. General Patton had the idea that maybe we should just go ahead and finish Russia off while we were at it. And of course, that didn't go well with most of the other people in the country, including the Russians. But we did our duty there, and then I was transferred later on up to the middle of Austria, which is Salzburg, which is a famous area in France or Austria. We went through France, of course, to get there, but our duty there was guarding prisoner of war camps. And being as I had a kind of a gift of gab, they call it, being an ex-salesman or partial salesman, I got assigned to an NCO club, and that was pretty good duty. And in between times, I actually ran an ice cream parlor, which was just a snack shop for GIs and so forth. While I was over there, of course, once everything cooled down, we played football in the fall. We had an inter league and throughout all of Europe, we call it. Each big what they call a division or whatever would have their football team, and we played in it. It wasn't pro football, but it wasn't too far from it, so we had a good time doing that. Other than that, it was just day after day.
What an amazing road you traveled from there, just outside of Westbrook. Would have you been born in the late 20s, Ike?
I was born in 1927, just south of town here on the farm. Because there was only 2 hospitals in the area at that time, and they were both county seats. They were 30, 40 miles away. Besides that was the end of the first Depression. And so there wasn't money enough to go to a hospital. In fact, my first spanking came from one of the first doctors that came to Westbrook, and that was Dr. Patterson, which I'm sure maybe your relatives would know about. But actually, we went to country school. I recall one time during the Depression that one young man's, a kid, we were all kids, his lunch pail tipped over, and all that was in it was potato peelings. That was the first Depression, so I don't think this one was too bad. But then from there, I went to high school here. From country school, we went 8 years. And country school, went to college, to high school was 4 years. And of course, at the end of the 4 years, you were drafted. And as soon as you became 18, you were drafted into the service. In fact, the local draft man said he told us when we were 17, the day we turned 18, he was going to get us, and he did. But you missed my best trip. In between my basic training, we were sent to Monterey, California. That was by train from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And we were recruited there and got ready to go to the Pacific. Of course, you're out in Monterey and on the coast, you're going to the Pacific. And so one night they loaded us up on this was a troop train, of course, which has bunks on the sides and so forth. Said, well, we're taking you down to the ocean to get you on the ships to go overseas. Well, we waited, we rode, and the next morning, we finally went to sleep. The next morning, we woke up and we were in the mountains. And we finally determined we were headed east. 6 days later, we end up in New Jersey, getting ready to go across on this famous cruise that you talked about earlier. And that's how that story went. The rest of the story, after I came home in 1948, and so when I went to work for the Ford dealer here under the GI program, I had a little bit of training. I started out as a mechanic, and when it took me about 3 days to set up one hay rake, the boss said, "You're not a mechanic, you're a salesman." So that's the best thing that ever happened to me. And let's see. And then, of course, the other part of that story is when I returned from World War II, we were being usher and discharged, a recruiting sergeant there said, well, all of you young guys, you're late coming home. All the older guys have all the jobs. You're not going to get any work, so you better sign up for the reserves. Mistake.
Yeah, that recruiter was pretty good at sales too.
Oh, yeah, he knew his job. Besides, he said, we only have a war every 20 years. He was wrong again. But that's how we got in the reserves, and how we got called up to go to Korea right away.
Hey, Ike, if we can go back to your time growing up, just briefly, what's it like being a farm kid in the early 30s? What are some of your first memories? What's your relationship like with your siblings, and what do you remember about your dad?
Well, that was at the end, at the ending of the first Depression, and of course you had patches upon patches on your overalls. Today, I just noticed down there that we had a dinner this last Sunday at our community center, and the young ladies down there took pride in how many holes they had in their jeans. And we were ashamed of that. In fact, our mothers would use any kind of patch to put something on our overalls.
You get the privilege to pay more for holes in your jeans.
Much more, I guess they do.
Yes, you do. Now that's a good salesman right there.
Anyway, of course, out on the farm, you had to do your chores, and of course, I ended up. My brother was drafted ahead of me, and I had to replace him as a farmhand from the home farm at the age of 14. I had to replace grown-up men at doing thrashing and all the other kind of farm work that was there, which was good for me. It made a man out of me, I hope.
Grow up quickly.
Actually, we. Our recreation in those days, we would play softball in somebody's cow pasture. It was kind of neat if you slid into second base. Sometimes it was easy.
Very soft side right there. Yeah.
I'm sure your father would realize what that was all about.
Yeah, absolutely. No one's going to want to tag you for the next 2 days after that. So what do you remember about your parents?
Well, they were both hardworking. They were both from there. The farm that we were on, my grandfather came originally from Germany in about 18. Let me see. I thought I made a note of that somewhere. 1866, it says here.
Mid to late 1800s?
Yeah.
He made the trek over?
Yeah, he had 8 brothers and 2 sisters. And 8 of those 12 children all immigrated to the United States. They came down into Iowa, where they had relatives that had gotten started. And then they would work for other farmers there and get a little stake. And then they would move up to buy land in Minnesota, which people would laugh at them because it was the frog pond of the country. But my grandfather had a team of horses and a wagon and a plow. When he came up here, he bought a farm south of town here for $9 an acre. Today it's in the 9,000 class.
Absolutely.
But he spent his first winter on that farm. He built a shack big enough for him and the 2 horses. And they spent the winter together in that shack. That's the beginning of farming back in those days. But from then on, all of these farmers prospered. They worked, like slaves, and had big families, of course. They raised their own hired people.
Absolutely.
So,
how old would have he and his siblings been? Did they come over as teenagers?
Well,
or
he came originally at 15, and he was in Philadelphia, and he worked there for a little while as in a newspaper office doing I don't know what. but then some of them went to Chicago. In fact, some of them had businesses in Chicago that they lost in the Great Fire.
Really?
When they had this big fire in Chicago, it burned out everything. So a lot of them then moved back here to Minnesota to other relatives, and they became farmers. Because my grandfather had 3 brothers with him, and they were all instrumental in building the community here. They start the co-op elevator, and they start the farmer store, and anything else that they needed in the business, in the farming community.
It's interesting. Consistent with the Kieker immigration from Germany. My great grandpa Heinrich came over about 20 years after yours came over from Germany, and it was the same trek. They made it to Illinois, the Chicago area, then to Iowa, and then because of land prices, my grandfather moved the family up to the Slayton area, and that's pretty interesting. That pipeline probably was pretty.
Well, it got to be pretty general with families because they had a trail really to follow, and they had someplace to go and someplace to get started again.
Did you know your aunts and uncles and cousins?
Oh my, yes.
You got to spend a lot of time with that extended family as well?
Well, we did, yeah. But they were all relatives right in this area. They were all cousins and uncles and so forth.
So as you mature into teenage years, we start learning about what's going on in Europe. You're 16, 17 years old. You made the comment earlier that the recruiter told you at 17, get ready. When you turn 18, something's coming. So what's that like? What's going on in your mind with you and your friends and your siblings? You said your brother put the uniform on a bit before you.
Well,
what's that like as a teenager, knowing that what's inevitable?
Well, of course, like any teenager, we're all gung-ho, we got to go do our thing, but I had 2 classmates, or not really classmates because they were older than I was, because they got drafted and left. They had to leave high school before they finished. And my brother happened to be with 2 of them at the same time. And 6 months after they were drafted, they were killed out in the Pacific. My brother went to Italy, and he was severely wounded in the mountains in Italy. So of the 3 of them, it was not good. But that's the one memory. But then the other part is we're still gung-ho. We got to go and do our thing, And I guess we were fortunate because most of that shooting war got over with, except being caught by a recruiter to go to Korea. That didn't work too good.
No, not at all. Well, many thanks. Just to owe so much to you and your brothers, literally and figuratively, your non-blood brothers who went and served during that time. The things that I went through when I was 17, 18, and current 17 and 18-year-olds, we can't imagine what it's like that you all did. So obviously, great deal of appreciation and thanks for all that. So once you were okay, it's your turn. You turned 18. What's your life? What are you doing then when that happens? Okay, the recruiter said, "Here's your card." What's the next step? What do they tell you? You have
We got out. We just graduated from high school, and we were taken to into basic training, and of course, then sent overseas. Like we said, I was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to be trained as a radio operator. But then they decided they needed cannon fodder, so they switched us over to artillery, and then the next thing you know, they were busy shipping us, and that's when this trip to the West Coast started.
Yeah, the cruise. So, is it a train? You get on a train from the Westbrook area? Where do you pick up a train to eventually get to Fort Sill? What's that?
Well, we were in Fort Snelling in in Minneapolis, and they shipped us directly from there.
So a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds get together and doing this journey together. What are meeting people you've never met before? What's it like having people from different areas of the state, of the region, coming together and
well, it's like
doing this
like
duty?
service group. You start to try to become a band of brothers because you've got everybody's back, and they've got yours, and they better be your brother, or you might be in trouble.
You're going to be in the same foxhole eventually. Was there any mischief, any disciplinary problems? You bring people in who had different levels of parenting over time. What's throwing a bunch of folks in the same room, the same train car, in the same setting? What's that
Well,
like?
there's a lot of things that I wouldn't want it on the screen. No,
I bet not.
you learn to have buddies, and of course, in the service, you end up with a buddy, and I happen to have one. He was a good softball catcher, and I was a pitcher, and so we got to play together quite a little in the service while we were till we got separated overseas, and that was the end of that.
So that was 1945 then. What do you remember? What month or what time period in 45 you would have embarked on your trip?
Let's see.
To 45, you would have graduated and turned 18.
I think it was in March. I don't remember exactly.
It doesn't mean exact.
Yep.
But when you get to Germany, the war's over, and you're the post-war period. A lot of devastation you no doubt saw. We all talk about the rebuilding time frame after World War II, but you probably didn't see a lot of that in the immediate aftermath. You just saw a lot of destruction.
Oh, yeah, it's because there was nothing left over there when you got there. These people you'd see these people out in the streets. They would take old bricks and clean them up and try to rebuild with them. In fact, a while back, I was interviewed by another. It was a newspaper lady, and I wanted to try to relay to them at that point. That was about a year and a half ago. That what was going on or had gone on in Europe, starting, with the Nazis, and then seeing what it ended up being, and looking at what was happening in our country, my statement was, wake up, America. It can happen here.
Absolutely, it can. We're a generation away from anything that can happen. And we have to embrace freedom and liberty. We have to embrace so many of the sacrifices people like you made to allow us to be where we're at right now. And we're not entitled to anything in this world.
My sacrifices were nothing compared to what some people went through.
Absolutely.
In the bottom of my heart, I think about the people in Vietnam and these jungles. I just can't fathom how bad that would be.
I think the same thing. A lot of my contemporaries who served in kind of the Gulf War periods with Afghanistan and Iraq and the other campaigns, even going back to Bosnia, it's certainly sacrifice, and it's not all that healthy to compare too much. But we did. We can't fathom what Vietnam was like, what World War I was like in those trenches, and just the devastation and death of World War II as well. So you were there though during that time. You were drafted, and it's when you turned 18, and you did you did your duty and did it well. So we're very grateful. What's it like traveling by train then through France, Belgium, Germany, and I think you said you eventually made it to Austria. So when you see these communities and you interact in whatever ways you did with the local population, What are you experiencing? What are
No,
you observing?
at that time, there was no fraternization allowed. You weren't allowed to communicate with people until maybe 5 or 6 months later after we were there. Originally, we were, you know, we couldn't even admire some of the Frauleins, and we had to do that at a distance.
What's it like then when you're in Austria? What are the tasks that you're doing? What kind of jobs are you holding? And in a bigger picture, what are you seeing? At that time, looking in the rearview mirror, what happened with Germany? Thinking about the current of eventually repairing, rebuilding Germany and what that policy looks like. But looking to the east, we also have the unknown of what life is like vis-a-vis the Soviet Union and where they're going to be and where their influence is. So that's a key time, that late 45 into 46, 47, the time where you were there and others. What did you see, or what was your experience on any of those fronts?
Well, like I say, our original assignment was on the Enns River. Our cannons were aimed across the river, and theirs were aimed across the river at us. And that was the dividing line. And of course, we were so young and gung ho, we didn't think anything of that. But that there was another part of that we were located at near a major bridge. And this was a returning area that crossed over from other countries like Hungary and some of those. And part of our crew was tasked with the people coming back home, trying to get back home. In other words, it would be similar to people coming up from the south, crossing our borders now down south. We had to have border stations. We had to they had to be screened as they came through. And well, God only just hates to think about it, that they had to be deloused and all of this kind of thing as they were trying to come back home to something, because it was that way all over Europe.
You talked about the cannons and guns pointed at each other across the river. That's with the Soviet troops. Any skirmishes? Anything that you saw or did there, or was
no,
kind
no,
of
no.
we just kind of knew where they were and what sector they had, and we knew what sectors we had, and we didn't cross?
Well, see, I was there. The shooting war had already was over with, and so this was just a matter of bluffing each other, I'm supposing. It was part of what General Patton had in mind, I think, but he didn't get his way.
You're a leader. You're a sergeant, staff sergeant, if I recall correctly, at that time. So a leader of soldiers. What's it like keeping morale up and maintaining good order and discipline in that time?
Well, in Europe, I was at my highest rank was a staff sergeant, and I was actually sent to a first sergeant school, and so I was an acting first sergeant. And what was involved there is you're in charge of a company of soldiers, do regular duty, and of course we were in the headquarters company at that time, so we were just more or less mostly administrative people that we supervised, but at that time. And then, of course, that carried over when I got to Korea. I was only there a few months, and I was promoted to first sergeant because the 24th Infantry was one of the first divisions to hit Korea. And of course, they had lost enough people that they needed replacement.
Eventually, you start putting your eyes and your vision to go back west again and head back home. How long did you spend in the European theater?
3 years.
3 years in Europe, so 45 to 48 time frame, and then you start looking back to the West. What's the transition out of Europe look like for a veteran like yourself, a staff sergeant?
Well, as I said earlier, when we came back from Europe, we were told that there wasn't any jobs available because all of the returnees ahead of us had them. So that's how I got cooked into the reserves, and that's how we ended up going to Korea a couple of years later.
Yes, indeed. So when you took the trip back on the boat, it's certainly a little more to look forward to going back to America than the uncertainties of going to Europe. Didn't have to worry about any U-boats, I guess, either going back
No,
that way. So other than playing cards, maybe what was that trip like?
very boring. And of course, of crossing the Atlantic, if you have 1,000 some troops on a troop ship that sleep in bunks up 3-4 high, and the one up above you gets seasick, it's not very pleasant.
Almost as bad as cow pie sliding into second base.
Just about.
Oh, so yeah, the Atlantic's pretty rocky. I was on a Navy ship in the Mediterranean for a bit once, and there were some days where that was a little rocky. We all would always remark, boy, can't imagine going across the Atlantic. And this is you eventually made it back to the East Coast, New York or New Jersey, or where did you process back in?
New Jersey was where we were discharged from when we came back from Europe.
So that was late in 1948 time frame. Then
actually, it was Christmas of 1948.
Christmas Day in 1948. Well, that's a nice Christmas present. Welcome home.
Yeah, as a staff sergeant, I was assigned to supervise the KPs for the Christmas dinner.
So what's life like transitioning back? The recruiter said there were no jobs because all the older guys got them. Were you able to come back into some work? And what were those years like?
Well, when I came back home, of course, this was my home area. I lived with my parents, and I eventually got lined up with a local Ford dealer on the GI training bill, and as I mentioned earlier, started out to be a mechanic, and after a couple of fiascos, he said, "You're not a mechanic, you're a salesman." So I then started in sales work, and I stayed there the rest of my time.
Was it Classy's Ford back then too?
Yep. He was Melvin Classy. As I said earlier, he was also the undertaker here. Part of our sideline duties was picking up people from car wrecks and so forth, because we had the only service that was available to bring people in. But that was just when you worked in those days, you did whatever had to be done.
If I recall correctly, another big event happened during those years in the 40s. Did you
in 40?
Yeah, in the 40s, did you and your you start courting your future wife during that time?
No, I didn't. My future wife was my high school sweetheart, but she didn't turn out to be my future wife because she got married while I was in Europe.
Oh.
So that was the end of that story. That's what they call a Dear John.
Yes, you did get to Dear John. Did you learn about that when you got home, or did you get a letter?
No, I knew that when I was in Europe.
Good.
Years before. No, I ended up marrying a local girl. I got married next door, which was the Lutheran parsonage right here next door to Diggers.
So you got married then after you came back, started working at Classy's, and got married?
Yep. I was married about 7 months before I got called up to go to Korea.
So it was at the end. It was late 40s. You get married. You get called up to go to Korea. Time for another train ride west?
Oh, my, yeah. Like I said, this time we went to Seattle, but this was on commercial train rides, so this was more like first class compared to anything else. So
you actually did get on a boat then going west this time. Yep. You didn't wake up on a train going east.
Well, that was in Europe. That was when we went to Europe.
Yeah. So you didn't have to worry about that this time.
No,
So you would have late 1850, 1950, early 1951. You're probably on that boat heading to Korea.
right.
So
Well,
what's
actually,
it like crossing?
1950 was actually 1950. It was in July that the war started, so
Right.
it was shortly after that.
Okay, so it was in the fall of 50. You were heading out.
Yeah, I went to see. I don't remember the exact dates, but it was middle part of the summer.
So
As I say,
crossing.
the trip crossing the Pacific was a lot better, although you could still get seasick because of the rolling water. You have to ask Digger that because he's an old sailor.
I certainly will. So how you get to Korea and what type of job are you doing? You have a little more rank now.
Well, I'm a staff sergeant when I get there, but I wasn't too long. I got promoted to first sergeant because they were, they had been, the combat started in 50. And this is, we were there just before the Chinese entered the war. In fact, we got there about in time that they did enter. And that's another story, of course. We were there for the winter of 1950, which if you ever see anything about MASH on the TV, which is kind of exaggerated, but believe me, it was like that, trying to find a place to stay warm. And we were sent over there with summer equipment and clothing because Korea, according to some quartermaster, was a tropical country. I wish I'd have had him there when I was standing in the snow up to my butt.
You would have given a snow-covered shampoo rub on the top of his head, like my brothers used to do to me. So what's a first sergeant doing in Korea?
Well, a first sergeant of any company carries the word of the company commander. Whatever he orders, that's what you send on down. You're in charge of an entire company of men. At one time, we had 500 people in our company because we were rotating soldiers in and out because of the war. The shooting war there had stopped too. So once the peace talks started, well, that was when I got enough points to head back home.
That's a lot to manage.
Well, you have a lot of people that are, it's like anything else. You're just the boss.
Yeah, other people to help you implement it.
Oh yeah,
What are some nice?
Excuse me.
What are some of the memories you have during that time?
Memories over there? Well, the worst memory, of course, is the winters of 1950. But other than that, when we were shipped, when we got there, of course, we went to Japan, and then we went over across on what they call landing craft to Korea, and that was kind of memorable. It was kind of like letting a gate down, unloading cattle in. And then when you got there, they let the gate down and they let them out.
For how long were you in Korea?
Not quite over, a little over a year.
So how were you able to? You didn't have orders when you went over there. You didn't have specific pinpoint orders of when you were going to return. How?
Oh no.
How do you know when your turn is coming to rotate out?
Well, they establish what they call points. Your time and service over there, and how many campaigns you had been in. Each one assigned so many points, and in your age. And of course, at that time, I had been married, so then that also added to it. So it didn't take. I had got my points real fast. Thank goodness.
Did you get points for your service in World War II?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, their total service was part of it.
Part of it.
Length of service.
How was it unusual to have? I mean, how many of your contemporaries there that you were working with had time prior service in World War II?
Well, that I don't know. It's one of the unusual things is that, of course, being a tail ender as I was in World War II, the only people that served in both wars were the ones that were regular army units that had came over there. These are full-time soldiers.
What are some of the bigger differences that you observed between America's war effort in Europe in the mid to late 40s and our war effort in Korea in the early 50s?
Well, of course, World War II was an all-out effort by everybody, and of course, the Korean War was considered a police action. As I said in one of my memoirs, that if that was a police action, I sure didn't want to have to tell it to the orphans and the widows that were from that police action.
What were accommodations like in Korea?
Well, we were accommodations were wherever you could find something that wasn't blowing up too far. It was kind of an unusual thing that happened there. If you talk about things, we found a hutch one night, and in Korea they build their houses with a tile running underneath it through the floor, and then you build a fire outside, and then that heat would go underneath the floor. So we got inside there, and of course, being like the Indians say, white men build big fire, Indian makes small fire and get warmer. But we built a big fire, and it got so hot we scorched our sleeping bags, which was stupid.
Learn not to do that again.
No.
How about food? How well did you eat? Did the logistics able to keep up with all the mouths that needed to be fed over there?
Well, that's the food. Yeah. Actually, that's what you brought up. An interesting point is that once in a great while, of course, the eggs that they served in the service were always powdered. And one time the way you eat there, you had a mess tent, and there would be posts set up outside with boards on them, and you could take your tray and go out and stand it on that and eat it. And one day when we came through, we had fresh eggs, which was unusual. And while I was outside, I put my tray down on this board and these posts, and I saw one of the egg cases sitting next to that the eggs had come to, and it said Westbrook Egg Company.
No way.
We had an egg company here, of course, that processed eggs, and of course they had sold them to the army or to the government. So that was kind of an experience that made it a little bit interesting.
Yeah, that put a smile on your face. What a small world.
Yes, it was. I tell a lot of people about that nowadays.
Come back and thank the folks with the egg at the egg plant there, at the egg farm
Which
there.
no longer exists, of course. Unfortunately.
Oh, but that is a really neat story. How'd you guys pass the time over there?
Well, after the peace talks started, why it was just routine soldier work, boring, keeping up the equipment and so forth. And actually, you moved a lot because they repositioned the troops a lot in those times.
So you get to know each other pretty well in those settings. Talk a little bit, if you would, about your relationships, some of your good friends that were over there, where they were from. Have you stayed in touch with them over the years, or did you?
No, actually, that was actually, the first sergeant is kind of looked upon as the witch at the party, So they don't have too many associates. But I remember, of course, the company commander and the company clerk. We all three slept in the same tent, so we got well acquainted and remembered each other.
How about during your time in Europe? Were you able to? Did you stay in touch with any of those Army buddies, or just came back?
Well,
Westbrook and
I had one that I'd like to have stayed in touch with because, after the war was over, there was any transportation, but a friend had gotten a hold of what they call an old duck, and he took this into a German mechanical shop, and he had that parts of that transferred into one of these German cars that you might see like Hitler used to drive.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like a 1934 Ford. Well, when he went home, he sold that to me.
Really?
And when it came to my time to go home, I sold it to a mess sergeant who was going to pay me for it after he got his re-signing bonus. Well, this has been about 80 some years later, and he hasn't got reassigned yet. He hasn't signed up yet.
Wow.
So that's what I remember.
How about relationships with back home? I think about my time, but one of the favorite people in a unit is the mail clerk, bringing the communications from home back to us, and then enabling to communicate back to home. Was there much letter writing to and from you? And what do you remember from the communications back home?
Well, I think I mentioned that earlier, my Dear John letter.
I remember that one.
I remember that one too.
Hopefully that wasn't the only letter you got.
Oh, no. Actually, I would write to my parents, and that was pretty much it, because at that time your friends were scattered all over the country.
It's a real difference.
They were in the service like you. Excuse me, go ahead.
It's a real difference to the more recent campaigns, being able to communicate immediately over the internet was certainly beneficial in many ways, but you miss out on the long, thoughtful letters, and even being able to see your parents' handwriting, and sometimes even the smell or the perfume of your sweetie or whatever it is. You don't have that intimacy of the correspondence that maybe you had there, but you made up for that with the immediacy of the correspondence that we had. For you, did you keep all your letters and did you still have them and keep them with you and go back and read them periodically?
No. They got lost in one. After I got into the commercial business, I was transferred so many times. I lived in 22 different places. So every time you moved, you got rid of something. Somewhere along the line, all that stuff disappeared. But when you talk about communications, you go back to them on my farm days.
Yeah.
Of course, we didn't have electricity or running water, telephone. If we wanted to make a phone call, we had to walk up to the neighbors and crank the phone that was hanging on the wall. And sometimes I think that was more reliable than some of your computers.
No doubt about that's true. Well, let's transition. You leave Korea in late 1951.
That's when I came home.
That's when you came home, and you come back to Westbrook, back to Cottonwood County?
Yep, back to Classy, and he was waiting for me. He said, your job is right here for you. Let's go to work. So that's what we did. I worked for him for 8-9 years before I went to work for New Holland Farm Equipment.
Okay, so rekindle with your wife, rekindle relationship with your employer there. That's going well. Are you back at the same farm
there? Do you have your own farm place then with your wife?
Oh, no.
You in town?
My folks left the farm in 1941. They had moved into town, so we were living in town.
Okay. So you come back. You're in town working at Classy's. Wife, do you start a family? Do you have kids then during that time?
Yeah, we did. We ended up before all the traveling was done. We had 5 children.
And then where did you all travel to when you left Westbrook? Then you and your wife, and the start of a family. Where'd you go to in the late 50s, early 60s?
Well, my first assignment was in Iowa with New Holland. I don't talk about making trips or anything. These were moves that we made with the company.
Yep.
And then after that many years, let's see, I think it was 3 or 4 years in Iowa. Then I was promoted and I went to Kansas City, and I was in Kansas City for over 6 or 7 years. Then when I got another promotion, I went to Charlotte, North Carolina. In between there, and from there I was transferred back to Minneapolis for a different job, but that's where I retired from.
How many years total with New Holland?
25.
25
years. I took an early retirement because at that time they were merging companies, and we merged with Ford at that time, and you have 2 of everybody, they offer you some pretty good parachutes. So I took one and got out.
Well, congratulations with that. So you got out, and then did you move back to Cotton County at that point?
Excuse me, say again?
Did you move back to Westbrook at that point?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I was here then. Of course, no, not from when I was first retired. I didn't move back to Westbrook. When I first retired, I went to Branson, Missouri. Where it's pretty famous now, but when I was in Kansas City, all that was there was the Holiday Inn. And we used to go out there in the spring and train salesmen on new equipment because the hay would be ready out in that area earlier than any other area. So, but then that's how I first got down in that area.
So what brought you to Branson then? And when you retired
Well, my son had been there, and he had a business out of St. Louis, and they were establishing what they call a yacht club. And down there, they needed somebody to sell. They called them documiniums. So where the rich people would bring their cruiser in and park it, and then we had a clubhouse up above it. I saw it recently, and it's expanded from that to 800 different units. So it started out bad and got good.
So you didn't fully retire. So you went down there a little time with your son and did a little bit of working.
Oh yeah, well, I hardly retired ever. From there, that's when we decided to move back to Westbrook. I told my wife that she wanted to move back here to Westbrook, and I said, well, we can move back here, but if you buy a house in Westbrook, you better plan on dying in it because you'll never get rid of it. Unfortunately, 3 years after she came here, she passed away. So it wasn't as funny as I thought it was.
God no. So that must have been what, in the late 80s, early 90s?
Oh, my brain. My brain is 94 years old, and I can't recall all these dates. But
absolutely. So
it should have been. Let's see where are we at now.
Looking back, what about your service in the Army, whether World War II over in Korea, or even do your 25 years with New Holland? What are some of the things that you value the most about that time?
Well, the great thing about it was that you got to see be in a lot of different areas of the country, and of course, while you were doing those jobs, you did a lot of traveling. As trainers, we used to travel all winter from different places, put on dealer meetings, and we got to stay in nice hotels and and eat too much and drink too much and things like that. It was pleasant work.
That's a key component to sales, being able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one part of it.
What are some of the places you enjoyed the most in your traveling, whether living or visiting? What are some of the?
Oh, I don't know. I'm kind of I'm happy wherever I am or try to be, and so I guess being right back here in Westbrook is about as enjoyable as you can get because it's peaceful and it's quiet. I've got a little acreage on the end of town up here, and I got a big picture window on the end of it. And occasionally I look out, and there's a deer walks by or something. And I actually got a thrill the other morning. I looked out, and right there in front of my garage door was a red fox sitting there looking at me. And you can't have that when you're in a big city.
You absolutely cannot. That's one of the keys to living to 94 and beyond. I think doing things like that. Any challenges for you readjusting or adjusting to life post your military service?
Well, yes. Things like coming here for your interview. I get told, you told me about them a long time ago, and of course I keep worrying about it then. And part of it is that my shrink tells me that it's caused by the panic attacks that I get from being in Korea. So that's why I live where I do, and I can look out the window, and then the panic attack goes away.
God bless you during those moments, and many thanks again for all the experiences you had on our behalf. So thank you. What's transitioning back to Westbrook? Obviously, you've stayed active in a strong veteran community there. What are some of the things that stand out during this time? I think you've been involved with that wonderful Veterans Memorial that was put up not too long ago. What else stands out with your time?
Well, when we moved back to Westbrook, I didn't retire. There was an international New Holland dealer up at Walnut Grove next to this town called me to want me to come and sell for him. So I did for about 3 years.
Of course you did.
And then, I just help him
Absolutely.
in selling equipment. And then after that, I came back. When I left there, I came back here in the local classes again. The lady came to me and said she wanted me to come back to work. So I went there and sold for about 4 or 5 years. In between time, I went to college and got a real estate license and sold a little bit of real estate. And finally, about 8 years ago, I hung it all up. And then all I do now is play pinochle and let that aggravate me.
Card shark that you are. Boy, you've been very active, even into your 80s. You were selling real estate. That's pretty interesting. What types of things did you, as you talk to youth today, or if someone come in and ask you questions, what are some of the things you've learned over your lifetime that you think are important for young people to know and understand to find success in this world?
Well, I think the most important thing is work ethics. I remember working in the harvest fields for a hot sun, and to make it sound sad, but hot and dusty and dirty. And if you got $1 a day, that was pretty good. Now they can't find people to even take a job. And I just don't quite understand it because I guess they had it too easy or something. But you've got to learn to work if you're going to get along in this world. You can't expect the world to take care of you.
Yeah, in navigating and overcoming obstacles in front of them. Obviously, you didn't have a choice with some of the obstacles and some of the challenges you have. You have to survive and you have to continue. So thank you for all of that, and thanks for all the service you provide, not only in the military, but the things that you continue to do these days. You're obviously a smart talented guy who's found a ton of success out there. And as one person told me as I was trying to learning a little bit about you is, boy, Ike's just an all-around good guy in so many ways. And so kudos to you. Any final thoughts on any note, any pearls of wisdom that you've gathered over the years that might be interesting for us to ponder as we sign off here? I really thank you for your time today.
Well, I guess the biggest concern right now is in the political arena. As I said to you earlier, I hope that America wakes up and doesn't let it happen here, which it almost did. And we need to be observant and participate in what has to happen to make it not happen again.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. Thank you for those words and all your thoughts and service, Ike. Obviously an amazing man and in an amazing journey that you've traveled. I like to say it's not about getting to a destination in life. It's about the adventure and everything you encounter and all the relationships one fosters over a lifetime is a key. And you've done that from growing up on the farm without electricity, without telephones, without indoor plumbing, to riding the 40 and 8 train car. I'm glad you weren't with the horses and you were 39 of your friends in those boxcars going through Germany and the trips across the big lakes, the Atlantic and the Pacific, those train rides back and forth across the U.S. and all those experiences you had in Europe and in Korea that we all still wrestle with at times. So, Ike, I just salute you. I thank you for all you've done for this nation and for your community. And I wish you well, wish you peace, and I look forward to our paths crossing here in the coming months. And because I look forward to shaking your hand soon. Take care, Ike.
Well, thank you too for what you're doing, and I hope it all turns out well for you. And God bless.
May God bless you and your family and everything that you encounter. Ike. Take good care. Dan Keeker here. Thank you for listening to this episode of the All Roads podcast. My thought-provoking conversation with Darrel Eichner. I'm always looking for more interesting, talented people to share their journeys. If you have any recommendations, please email me, Dan Keeker, at allroads@dankeeker.com. Now, the spelling on that last name is Kuecker. So it's DANKUECKER.com. That email address again, allroads@dankeeker.com. Until then, make the most of this and every day. Go travel your road with a purpose and a smile.